Hello there, this is Sam from Clearbox, and thank you very much for joining this webinar with our guest this month, which is I2. So I'm Sam Marshall, I'm the owner of Clearbox Consulting based in the UK, and we're a consultancy that specialises in the strategy side of intranets and digital workplaces. We help organisations put together roadmaps for how, for example, SharePoint and Office 365 fits with the rest of their digital workplace plans, and then we help them with things like the adoption and the governance side. We don't sell any technologies ourselves, but like everybody else, SharePoint and Office 365 is a big part of our world. With me today is Joyce from I2. Do you want to introduce yourself, Joyce?
I do, Sam. Thanks for that. This is Joyce Query from I2. We're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been in business for over 35 years doing IT and started I2 in 1989 or 1998, strictly working in the ECM world, Enterprise Content Management. We believe it's content that drives the success of portals. Technology is important, but it's the content and the information and its life cycle that is important to drive the success of a digital workplace. So we specialize in digital workplaces, utilizing Microsoft Office 365, and we have a flagship product called SiteSprout that we developed to help particularly mid-sized companies jumpstart their internet development. It has 10 pre-designed sites for managing all business functions, and it really jumpstarts an internet development.
Marvelous. I'm very glad you could join me, Joyce. Today we're going to be talking about digital workplace adoption, but particularly about the role of employee self-services within that. So we've got a quick poll. We'd like to understand where you're at. What you're going to see is a dialog box pop up saying, have you created an employee self-service center already? And you've got options from yes through to no, still thinking. If you want to go ahead and vote, we'll give you a few seconds to do that. Let's give you a few seconds more. Once we've got most of the votes in, you'll see the results come up so you can see how everyone's rated. We're particularly interested in doing this webinar around mid-size enterprises because often it's the mid-size ones that look to the intranet or a kind of digital workplace platform to bring it all together. What we see is that 54% saying we've got some elements, it's fragmented, but as you might expect, nobody's really kind of rolled out the grand scheme. Joyce, so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is
what you expect.
This is exactly what we see in the workplace too. That very few people they've attempted to do it, but don't have anything that's working well for them.
Mm-hmm. And often what we encounter is there might be, for example, an HR platform that's in use, but then you go to finance or facilities and they're still using spreadsheets or emailing templates out and getting people to print them off and fill them in. So it's not like there's one level of maturity that people are at. Okay.
You know,
great.
Sam,
so,
too. Sorry to interrupt. Just real quick, I was thinking about this because it's something I think about all the time. I think about companies and the information that they have and all these documents and Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoints and Word documents. And I see it as important as their assets in an ERP system. And I'm often surprised they don't spend as much time trying to manage that data because a digital workplace will bring a lot of efficiencies to an organization. So they really need to start spending some money on this area.
Yes. Yeah, and let's hope through this webinar we can encourage them to do that. So what we're going to talk about is, I'll be leading off and talk about adoption in general, because there are multiple kinds of adoption. Then Joyce will tell us about why employee services matter, and then hand back to me and I'll talk about how it fits within the other elements of your digital workplace, such as collaboration and the role of the internet for communication. Then Joyce will tell us about how she approaches identifying services, and we'll round off with a quick discussion about automation versus transformation. As Wedge said, please do ask questions at any time. If we can deal with it within the flow of what we're talking about, we'll happily do that. But also we'll allow some time at the end for a further Q&A session. So this thing called adoption, I mean, we use the word adoption because that's what everybody else uses, but to me, adoption sounds a little bit like you've got a three-legged puppy and it needs a home, and it's not necessarily the most inspiring description to talk about for your digital workplace. Or when people talk about adoption, they tend to get fixated on like the user numbers and the page loads and hits and so on, as if intensive use is the thing that you're aiming for, and more is better. But really, I encourage our clients to take a more nuanced view. And that's to say, well, take a second to consider the different elements of a digital workplace. So timesheets, customer databases, holiday entitlement, expenses, claims, maybe an expert community in the social network or the lunch menu. If I said to you I was going to do a campaign to encourage adoption of each of these elements, I bet you'd say that some things are going to be dead easy, like lunch menu. Everybody's going to look for the lunch menu anyway. And expenses, claims, no matter how awful you make the system, people will probably plow on through that come what may, because they're intrinsically very motivated to make that happen. But something like timesheets, you might struggle to get compliance with. And something like reading corporate news or taking part in an expert community like a Yammer group can really feel like a much less well-bounded problem in terms of how you address it. And it's quite likely that you'll never reach 100% with something like Yammer participation. And what I want to say to you is that that's probably okay. So we shouldn't think about adoption as being one thing for our intranet, but think about it as being multifaceted in the sense that we probably have a different adoption targets and desired outcomes according to the thing that you want people to use. So when there are mandatory elements, like if you've paid money for a lunch and you want to claim your expenses back, then adoption is probably just a simple issue of making sure that people can get through the process and don't, for example, call the help desk because they don't know what buttons to click. But a lot of the digital workplace is actually what you might call elective adoption. So people can get away with going about things in different ways. File sharing is a classic example. We may well tell everybody that what we want now is for them to use check-in and check-out and version control on SharePoint. But if someone still puts a file on a network drive or sends it out as an email attachment, it still works. You know, it's unlike expenses, they will still in effect have shared that file. And culturally, the extent to which people push back against that and say don't do it can vary enormously. A lot of the times people let it slip. So for that kind of adoption, it's much more like what we're seeing here, which is Roger's diffusion of innovation model, which is how innovations, new technologies, new ways of doing things percolate in a consumer world. So this curve, you probably know the language, even if you don't know the model, the early adopters, the late majority, the laggards. And it's been demonstrated in over about 4,000 separate studies now, everything from American farmers taking on hybrid seed corn right through to the take-up of mobile phones and then the diffusion of smartphones. They all tend to follow this similar bell curve. Now, what a lot of people don't necessarily grasp about this curve is that it's not just a matter of time. It's not that everything goes all the way through the curve. And it's not that some people just take longer to adopt. What Roger's studies show is that for something which is new and exciting, there'll be maybe 15% that leap on it and do it anyway, because they're intrinsically interested in what's new and novel about it. So for employee services, you probably get some early take-ups and people who are willing to be part of a pilot just because they want to see what's new and just because they'd like to be ahead of everybody else in terms of their knowledge. These are the people who always sign up for beta testing, for example. Then you come to the early majority, and the early majority are enticed into things in a very different way. The fact that it's new, they probably don't care. But if you say this is new and it's better, then they become interested. So if you say, for example, this way of booking travel isn't just different because it's good for the company, but it's also better because it gives you, for example, more control and choices over how you travel, then the early majority will be interested. Whereas the late majority, although they're kind of swung by the benefits, they also tend to fixate a lot more on risks than the early majority. So a lot of companies, they will, for example, roll out Yammer, see good uptake to about this point, and think that oh, they can kind of take the foot off the gas a little bit because everybody else will join in. But that's a mistake. What happens is that it tends to slip back rather than going forward, because the late majority need to be addressed in a different way and told not only these are the benefits, but also this is how you can mitigate some of the risks. So if you're introducing employee services and think about a new process, maybe what you're asking people to do, for example, is give more personal data in order to book travel, then to get most people on board, you need to address not just the benefits, why it's good for them, or the what's in it for me, but also help people understand how to mitigate the risk, for example, by giving them a dummy application process that they can go through. So the first time that they book something, they're not actually playing with real money or playing with a real booking. They're actually learning in a safe environment. So for some people that might have been a bit too theoretical, but what I want you to take away from it in a more practical sense is that when you're planning the rollout of employee services and think about adoption, the big question to ask is, do we need to reach 100% adoption, and is that realistic? Because a lot of the times the return on investment business case is made on the basis that we've got 500 employees, and if 500 employees use it, then our return on investment is 200%. But what if only 50% of people ever actually use it? Do we still have a business case that stacks up? And if that's realistically the case, how do we target the 50% most readily that will take it on board, and maybe decide that the late majority we should ignore because the effort, the expenditure to get them on board wouldn't make the business case stack up? And it could also be that, you know, there are physical barriers, like saying it's cheap and compelling to roll this out for office staff who already have digital devices, but we have 20% of our workforce are on the road, they're disconnected. Maybe for them, we still let them do things by phoning this number rather than asking to do things online when they only have an unreliable 3G mobile data connection, for example. So that's the start of thinking about the business case. And now over to you, Joyce, to talk about why employee services matter and what the upside of getting all these things is.
Great, thanks, Sam. You know, it's interesting. Whoops, and I jumped ahead. My cursor's doing this. Hold on. Ha!
Do you want me to get you back? Are you all right? You're driving.
Yeah, go ahead. Drive it back for me, please. Thank you. Sorry. I'm not touching the mouse for the next 2 minutes. Anyway, yes. Why employee services matter. So let's talk about this. When you think about something like an HR site, an HR self-serve site, you are really affecting all employees. Everyone's going to have to come to the site to get the data they need, like benefit data, maybe compensation data, anything, performance appraisal data. So it's going to affect all employees. People often ask us, where do you start with a digital workplace? And I often recommend HR because it's one of the best places to self-serve. Of course, there's other places you can do self-serve, but HR seems to affect everyone. It's also, you know, highly visible to everyone in an organization, including your executives. And that's really critical because executives are the ones that are going to drive this success. We've often found that, you know, grassroots efforts for self-serve portals don't go far. You have to have an executive sponsorship. So if you could make something visible to the executive and something to achieve what they're looking for, then you're going to have more success because you're going to get the budget and the support that you need to go further. It also, of course, saves time with automation. In HR, there's lots of places you can automate mundane tasks. It not only helps make efficiencies for employees because now they can do things on their own, but it also allows HR to do strategic business needs and address those for a change. They can stop doing those mundane tasks that take so much time and start to address some of the more important things in the business. It also empowers and engages and helps to retain employees, particularly these younger employees that are coming in and have expectations for everything to be digitally organized and located and accessible. It also gives, you know, now you're giving employees the power to control some of their own data, which is real important to employees, and it certainly takes the load off of other people to manage some of this information. Because the employees are now keeping some of their own data up to date, hopefully it's going to be more accurate and up to date. Obviously, they're going to be responsible for some of this stuff, offloading those mundane tasks from HR to the employee, but it helps to to make sure that the data is more up to date. It empowers those HR professionals with insight. Once you build a really good, or any of the department that have employee self-serve site, helps them with insight. You can start to see far more things than you saw before, because now you're collecting data that you didn't have access to before. And then finally, it does exceptional opportunities for efficiencies. We talked about this before, and how much automation. I do apologize here. Okay, so let me tell you about a story, a personal time off policy that was in one organization we were working with. They had practice of HR always sending the policies out in an attachment in an email. So over time, they had probably at least 18 versions of PTO policy, and they had differing rules, and they had no effective date in the policy. So you can imagine the chaos, the confusion, the opening to liability that it left this company in pretty dire straits. So the solution was to create one policy, send out links, of course, to that policy, and then making sure we had IRM, Information Rights Management, which is a SharePoint feature that controls the download of the document, controls who has access to read, write, change, things like that. So those policies all help to make sure that problem didn't happen in the future.
Okay, so in terms of where the services fit within your digital workplace, Joyce has talked primarily about HR services, but there's a whole bunch of other things in the right-hand column that you might consider, like room booking, travel booking, catering, IT help desk, and even things like asset management. So it could be about replacement laptop or a new desk and all those kind of things as well. All of these potentially can be seen as employee services that will draw people into using an intranet. So the clear box where we model these is seeing them as being part of an overall digital workplace plan. And I'm not going to go into the whole detail of this diagram. There's lots on our website if you're interested. But the point to make here is that you'll see there are 5 blue boxes at the top of the screen. So we see a digital workplace as being a collection of services, capabilities in the general sense that allow the organization to communicate and engage, to collaborate, to find and share things, to work in an agile way. And the business applications one is where employee services fit in. So to access employee services and actually get transactional things done. What matters when you design any element, not the easy thing to say, of your digital workplace, is ensuring alignment with all the other parts. To me, that's what the difference in digital workplace thinking is compared to, say, traditional IT strategy, where maybe there would have been a portfolio of projects, but doing each one of these things in relative isolation. And you can see that we use a metaphor of town planning, because if you build a factory, then you also need to think about building roads and power connections and water supplies, and whether a factory next to, say, a cafe is a nice thing to have, or whether you want to zone things to keep the industrial and the recreational apart. Bring it down to the ground then. Think about an individual employee's experience. So employee experience, quite trendy at the moment, and we definitely think it's a good way of tackling some of this. Here's Marcus. Marcus is a project administrator. Imagine that his boss has said, hey, Marcus, I want you to go on a training course around project management. So this line charts Marcus's reactions to this. He starts off feeling quite happy about it, great chance to learn something new. And he probably begins by going on the internet and searching for training, because that's what he's expecting. But imagine what he gets back are a bunch of PowerPoint slides about things like health and safety training and gender bias training and all that kind of stuff. And at that point, he starts to feel frustrated. Okay, so search never works. I'm going to call the HR help desk. He waits for a while, eventually gets through, and he's told, oh no, we don't call it training, we call it learning and development. You've got to search for L&D. Okay, so some of his enthusiasm dampened now. He goes back to the internet, finds L&D under central services, if that makes sense. Logs into learning management system. Okay. Password challenge here because the systems haven't been joined up. So that's yet another point in which digital workplaces can break down as you go from system to system. But imagine he gets logged in finally, And he goes, great, yes, this is what I was looking for. Want to book my training course, everything's listed, nice clear descriptions. This looks like the training course for me. Now we need to get manager approval, and he's asked what the cost code is, and he doesn't know what that is. And there's nothing within the learning and development system that tells him. So at that point, basically, he goes completely out of process, goes into Yammer, disturbs everybody saying, what do I do about approval? You know, now I'm feeling really annoyed because I've waited over 15 minutes and I've got work to do. You know, this isn't work. This was meant to be a quick and easy task, and none of it seems to be going as smoothly as it should. So you'll note that the breakpoints in this are not that the individual systems aren't working. You know, even search on the intranet can find L&D once you know the word. It's the fact that no one's thought through, in Marcus's case, where would he start and what would it take for him to actually get that course booked and approved. It's becoming increasingly important because people like Marcus are now getting very good consumer experiences. So the expectations are sky high. The reality, metaphorically, if I compare it with the dismal burger versus the one that they advertised, is that the experience that Marcus gets as an employee is falling short. And this, of course, is, you know, this is what is the swimming against the current when it comes to getting a good adoption, is that if it sounds like a good thing to do, Marcus wants to book his training course, he's motivated, but it's too hard. That's when the adoption starts to go downhill again. So I think the thing to do is to identify the right services and put all your energies into that joined up journey rather than trying to do loads of services at once. So Joyce, take us through how you would identify the services to start with.
Okay, will do. This is a process we follow in our organization. So first you have to identify the self-service team. And a part of that team needs to definitely be executive sponsorship. And I mentioned before that you need that for the financial backing that you're going to have, you need that executive sponsorship. Another thing that's important is that you educate executives over what the technology can do. Many of them don't understand it. We spend a lot of time educating executives on the features and benefits of what a self-serve portal can do. For each site that you build, for each service, you need an owner. So if it's an HR site, you need an HR owner. IT should not be the owner. The business area should be the owner. And even within HR, something like that, you might have multiple owners. So one person may be managing all the benefit enrollment data, maybe someone else doing, you know, the performance appraisals. It depends on how your organization's structured and how you want to look at the technology and how to utilize it best. IT, of course, needs involved. They should, as I said before, not be the owner of it or even running it, but they need to be involved because of the technology. You need to find those early adopters, those employees that are early adopters that Sam mentioned earlier. They can be a huge force in helping to get adoption of your portal going. They'll spread the word. They're already self-motivated. They'll really help get the portal get some traction. And then also think about outside third-party suppliers or vendors. Are you going to be linking to other, you know, maybe a payroll system or some kind of other supplier that you need to talk to? They might be part of your team as well. The team is important, and you need to take some time to think about how you're going to structure the team. Then you should have a workshop with this group. The workshop's intended to, you know, help build a strategy for how you're going to deploy the self-serve site. And the first thing they need to do is look at your corporate drivers and align them with their goals and objectives. So if they have for instance, we worked with one firm that had an objective of growth through acquisition. So we built a self-serve portal for them to manage all the data that had to go between the buyer and the seller and all the entities, all the lawyers, all the accounting firms, and everybody who had come into it. So it was a portal to self-serve them. So we brought in those corporate drivers were such growth by acquisition. The site was built just to support that acquisition process. Identify and prioritize goals and objectives. This is, you know, a lot of people when they sit there, and we do this in a room with a bunch of sticky notes, and we ask everybody to just take 5 minutes and write down what they think is important for this portal, and then each get up and talk about it. it's important that you get not only the what of the goal, what they want to do, but why. Why are they doing it? Let me give you an example. There could be a group, the workshop helps people gain consensus on direction, helps to identify means to measure a site's success, and then it lays out priorities for the site. But when you're looking at goals, you need to think about the what and the why. So you need to think something like a week goal would be to increase collaboration. Well, how can you make that a better goal? You would say to increase collaboration between salespeople to attain higher close ratios. Now you have a chance to measure close ratios and see if your portal's being successful. Another example would be HR might ask for something like fast track new hires. Well, that's fine. That's something you can do. But why are you doing it? Well, you're trying to, of course, make efficiencies in the organization, and you can do some soft ROI there to see, what kind of efficiencies you're seeing. So capturing that why is as important as capturing the what they want to do. Then the team can also, in that same workshop, talk about content. And we brainstorm about all the potential content that could be in this portal. And we sit and prioritize that. We also talk in depth about the audience. And, when you might think, well, they're employees, but how do you break those down? You've got part-time, full-time, union, non-union. They all have different information needs. So you need to think about how that information is going to get to them. Okay, you guys can take back over.
Oh, there you go.
Every time I touch my mouse, it changes the page. I'm sorry. So when you sit there, so identifying your services, match your goals and objectives, your content and audience to services. So you do this match, right? You found out what the goals are. So you want to build now that self-serve, new hire site for the employee. So that's where you're going to start because everybody agrees to it. But you look and match those goals, content, and audience to the services, which are critical, which are important, which are nice to have. In our process, we actually have people with the sticky notes up on the walls. We actually have people go up and vote for which they think are most important, and that helps us identify and prioritize the information and where it should go on a page.
Okay, so the last thing we wanted to touch on was about whether we're talking about automation or transformation here. And an example that I kind of like from the UK is our train companies. So we're in the consumer world at the moment. I think it's fair to say that the British train service is past its glory days, and sometimes our trains run late. And the only good thing about that is that if it's really late, then you can get compensation. And it's called delay repay. And traditionally what it used to be is if your train was, say, more than 60 minutes late, they would walk up and down the train and give you a paper form that looks like this. And you'd have to fill in all the boxes and put your train tickets in there and lick around the edges and stick it in the post. And maybe 6 weeks later, back in the snail mail, you would get a check that you then have to go and cash. So although it was nice to get refunded, it wasn't a great subjective experience at the time because basically you got home extra late. And what did the train company do? They gave you more paperwork to fill in, and then they gave you a check, which is also a pain to process. Some of the companies at least had the good sense to digitize the form. So they would put it on their website and you could fill it in online. And the best ones even let you photograph your train ticket and upload the photograph from your smartphone and put that in the form as well. And then it took 6 weeks, and at the end of it, you got your check in the post. But really all that was doing was digitizing the existing process. So it was automating it, but it wasn't transforming it. And then one company, Virgin Trains, had the presence of mind to reflect on this and say, do you know what? We could really do this in a very different way. So what they said was, if you've booked your ticket on the Virgin Train site, we know what train you were traveling on. Of course, as the operator, we know whether your train was late or not. We got all your credit card details. So as soon as that trigger goes saying your train was more than 30 minutes late in Virgin's case, we'll send you an email confirming that you were delayed and apologizing for that. And within 24 hours, you will get the payment credited directly back onto your credit card. So you don't have to fill in a form, there's no snail mail, and it's super quick. And I think that's really clever because actually it does make you feel like Virgin care about the fact that you were delayed and inconvenienced and they want to put it right, rather than the old way, which kind of feels like, yes, we're obliged to give you compensation, but we're going to make it as difficult to try and put you off. Virgin is actually saying we can transform that into a positive customer experience. In the internal digital workplace world, one example I like is from Kobe. Kobe is a Danish architecture consultancy company. And they have loads of architects, as you might expect. Their hourly rate is pretty high, so using their time wisely is really important. And they looked at the work that architects are doing in the field and said, well, they take field notes. So, for example, inspect bridges under construction, and they will look at how the concrete's laid down and take notes on how it's progressing and so on. And they'll take photographs, which used to be with a great big SLR. And they had the same thought process. Said, well, rather than just digitizing the form that they fill in on their paper clipboard, they've all got smartphones. What could we design as an app that really helps them with their work? So they came up with this Field Notes app. And what it does that's different to a lot of apps is that it really makes use of the sensors in the phone rather than just shrinking everything down to a tiny screen. So you can see here they can take photos, they can take videos. It uses GPS, so the architect can pinpoint on a map exactly where it is that they're doing the inspection, and they can type short notes. Then the magic happens when they get back to the office. The app syncs into a ready-made Microsoft Word template, populates it with all the notes and the photos and the map GPS data into that Word document. Now your architect sat at a keyboard, so that's the right time to do the tidy up and type into more expensive notes. But it's a great way of thinking about, if we break down this process, how can we optimize productivity at any point, but also what's the end-to-end journey through this? So it's not just an app, we're thinking about the end point, which is completion on the desktop for a fully fledged report. And Joyce, you're also talking about transformation from a content point of view as well. Tell us about that.
I will. Being an ECM company, I can't stop talking about how content can be transformational. So we've seen in companies where something like an executive blog, which they'd never done in the past, really brings people in and helps with adoption. Like we did it at one company, and every Friday, the executive blog would go out, and every morning employees would come in and log in just to see the blog. One of the complaints we get from executives is the work it requires. So we round robin the requirement, cross executives, so that they can do the blog and not take too much time out of one executive's day. But it works really well from a sense of adoption, because it's that one piece of information that everybody wants to see. They want to know, how are we doing? What is the state of the union? So think about content from that perspective. What new content that was never delivered to employees before can be transformational?
And I guess a kind of hybrid of those two ideas, Joyce, is that it would be nice to see people who are in charge of employee services, like the head of HR and the head of facilities, blogging as well, because often it feels like as employees, these processes are introduced and changes happen to us, but they're a little bit faceless sometimes, rather than saying, in HR, our goal is to make it a lot easier, for example, to see what benefits you're entitled to as an employee. So here's what's coming and here's why. And I would welcome your feedback and thoughts on that to really make it part of that involving process that you were talking about earlier.
That's right. It is. When you do these workshops with the right team, it can be very transformational. Not just the content, but just all the features you're going to add. It can be a lot of fun.
Okay. Very good. So we're on to the Q&A time. So everybody in your GoToWebinar control panel, you should see an area where you can type in questions, so please go ahead and do that. While you're having a think, we're just going to tell you a little bit about what iSquared and ClearBox are. So Joyce, back to you.
Sure. So we offer a product called SiteSprout. It's an intranet in a box technology that takes Microsoft SharePoint and all of the Office 365 applications and rolls them into one digital workplace. What we found with Microsoft 365, while we love the tools, they seem to be independent and it's hard to understand how to work them together. So we built a tool called SiteSprout that integrates all the 365 apps into one tool. You have a home site, and then it has 10 functional sites for every business function, so HRIT. They're already built out with metadata. It really does jumpstart an organization's intranet and extranet development. We also, of course, do services through the iSquared side of the company, not the product side, and can help anybody with any SharePoint needs at all.
Great. And SiteSprout is one of the products that we list in the SharePoint Intranet in a Box report, which is an annual collation that we do where we conduct independent reviews of the leading SharePoint in a Box products that really take the base Microsoft product and add in all the things that you might need for a corporate intranet, such as news publishing, and pulls together Yammer into the comments of news and enhances search and things like people profiles as well. So if you've got a SharePoint-based intranet and it's not doing what you want and you're thinking about enhancing it, then our guide will give you a quick start to shortlisting the vendors to get in touch with and find out more from them. If you want to buy it, then you can download it immediately as a PDF from clearbox.co.uk. And if you put in Sprout Webinar, you'll get 10% off the current list price, which is $595 US. So if you've got any questions about any of that, please do put them in there. At the moment, we just got one question, which is, I think, in relation to what you were saying, Joyce, about identifying services. So would you ever run a pilot first and get feedback from a subgroup before you go ahead with that?
Oh, we do all the time. We write. So once the design is done, the team goes back and actually builds a pilot site for the team, and then the team reviews that pilot site and all come to agreement that is what they're looking for. Absolutely need to do that, because you know they don't. Employees don't understand the technology. They don't understand what features you can offer. So you're offering many different features they've never seen before. And
that's yeah. And would you do things like focus groups before you do the service identification? Is that part of your approach?
We do individual interviews with the people who are responsible for the content. The focus groups, you know, it depends on the size of the organization. If it's a really large, they'll have the deep pockets to allow us to do focus groups. Smaller organizations, we don't get that kind of cash to do those kinds of things. They're important, but don't always have them. But the individual interviews and the workshop together is really helpful in building the strategy for the sites.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying when it comes to the cost of doing focus groups, especially if you've got like a field workforce. We did some work with a charity and we really wanted to talk to the outreach workers, but basically it would have meant them taking time out of their day to travel to one of the regional offices to meet us, and that was a big ask. So with them, we just went into their office and did a bit of shadowing. But the charity also had, for example, a number of rest centers that we went to, and it was good to talk to people like janitors and maintenance workers and the people who did the catering, and just get the world view, because you know, one of the janitors, he basically said, I don't want anything on my phone. I've got a physical book where the manager writes in the jobs that need to be done for the day, and I like being communicated that way. And I often kind of kept that with me in my brain to remind myself about, yeah, okay, so we can't necessarily assume that it's viable for everybody to use the services that we might introduce, because at what point does this person actually even get an alert message when they don't expect things to come through on their phone? But focus groups can be good to talk to our employees. For example, one of the opening questions you use is just say, so tell me about what a typical day for you is, and walk through the day-to-day frustrations that they have. and then don't at all expect them to say, and the perfect solution to this would be some kind of transactional system, Sam, where I log my request. But I can hear the frustration when they say, I emailed someone in head office and I never heard back from them, or they said they'd get back to me and I had to keep nagging them to find out what the progress was on my request. And when I hear that, I think, okay, so yeah, if there was some kind of ticketing system where they could go in themselves and see what was the status of it, that would be so much better for them. Okay, so we've got a question coming from James. Thank you, James. It says, increasingly HR and other systems outside of the internet are becoming one-stop shops for information. For example, you can book your leave, but also if you have any policies related to leave, etc. Do you see this fitting with what you just described during the webinar on conflicting with what an intranet would provide, for example, access to policies? So, Joyce, I don't know what your take on this is, but yeah, we often see this split where the policies live on the intranet and then the actual transaction, like booking training or claiming a benefit, sits on a separate HR system. My general advice is that we should try and avoid that split, because if, for example, you want to book parental leave, as you go through clicking the boxes in the process, you kind of need to refer to, okay, what is my entitlement and what are the constraints that go with it? What's your experience, Joyce?
Exactly the same. What we do is, particularly when we start working on HR self-serve sites, there's a lot of ancillary software that they might be using, like payroll services and stuff. So when a client goes or employee goes to use those services, it's just a link to those services. Actually have, the content there, and helps them get to that data pretty quickly without them having to go search for it and find it later.
Yeah. And search in particular can be a big challenge if, for example, if all your policy data moves over to the HR transactional system, because I would bet that your search engine, like your SharePoint search engine, isn't indexing all those policies that might live on Workday or ServiceNow. So when someone searches for parental leave, nothing's going to come back. And then they get confused and frustrated. So James, although you say HR is setting up as a one-stop shop for information, I think we need to be very careful about the use of that phrase one-stop shop, because it might be a one-stop shop in the eyes of HR, but most of your employees won't really have a clear idea about where HR services start and stop, or where someone else will be the provider of that information. And if you're really new to the organization, it can actually be very hard to work out, for example, if learning sits under HR, or indeed, imagine you're in a meeting room and the display screen isn't working. So do you have to go to the IT system for that, or the facilities system for that, or is there something else that's got some clever acronym name for it? Really, you do need something that helps navigate you to the transactional part first, and that should be, if not in an intranet, in some central place where you can find the answer before you get to the transactional element. Okay.
Sam, one thing we didn't talk about that was probably important to mention, and I think I saw a message come in here, that's about training. That's, people often overlook training, and when you talk about adoption, that's huge, and training can take on many forms, right? You can have videos available for people to watch and understand how the technology. You can do brown bag lunches. You can sit down and do face-to-face training. There's all types of means and manners, but you need to have a really strong training program too.
Yeah, for a lot of these things, and I still hear people say, oh, nobody trained me how to use Facebook, so why should we train you on this other part of the digital workplace? But the reality is that Facebook is really hard to use if someone says, I want you to do X, rather than you electing to do what you want to do in Facebook. So all of these systems, particularly we might be dealing with a demographic that isn't necessarily that high on the digital literacy scale. We really do need to think about how do we support them as well. And that comes back to the Rogers diffusion of innovation curve that I showed, that one of the reasons why the late majority are in the late majority is that without training, they feel that it's a risky thing to do. They don't want to look stupid, for example, by getting it wrong on this computer system. Training is a great way to help them overcome that mental block. Okay, so that's all the questions we've had come in. Thank you, everybody, for that. We shall leave you with these contact details here. Again, both Clearbox and iSquared will follow up with you with some more information about what we do, and also a link to the webinar recording, and we'll put the slides up on SlideShare as well if you want to share those. So from me, thank you ever so much for joining. It's been great to have you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks again, everybody. Goodbye.